Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the great introduction, Ali. I feel privileged to stand in front of you and make my presentation about resiliency. Like as Evan said, I learned about BizFit recently through Ali, and I'm very encouraged to hear that there is such an energy on a business side of what we do, which resiliency. Sometimes as a building regulator, as a building official or government official, we feel like everything is on us, or we have to make sure that our communities are sustainable. But I'm encouraged to hear that there is more than just regulators and officials that are caring about this, knowing that there are 360,000 businesses that care about the operation and stay sustainable. Let me know, or makes me feel like we are all concerned, and that's very, very important. Thank you. And thank you for those of you who attended this presentation. I hope my part of presentation today helped a little bit to further explain what is happening locally. Evan mentioned from the state level and federal level. I'm going to get focused more on local level, City of Long Beach. City of Long Beach is the 7th largest city in California, and it's a major player in the economy of California and the nation because of the port and because of the size of the city we are. Just for your information, Long Beach is larger than Atlanta, Georgia. So this city is right here. But thank you. 1906 earthquake in San Francisco, our colleague David Clark mentioned about that, was the beginning of what is we talk about seismic resiliency. 300,000 people were homeless at the time, and most of us were not around at the time. We just read this by reading books. But same size earthquake, it happened in San Francisco again in 1989. This time, 63 people dead and about 3,700 injuries. I was privileged to be a part of the rescue group at San Francisco earthquake. From Southern California, we went up there based on a request from the city of San Francisco, and I was actually on the streets seeing some of the damages and some of the difficulties that people of San Francisco went through. What this indicates here is that we learned certain things in 1906 from San Francisco earthquake, but we could have learned probably a little bit more and probably done something more. Because as you can see, the similarity of the two pictures. The first picture is a soft story damage that happened in 1906. We sort of experienced the same thing in 1989. So by being proactive, by being more paying attention to some details, we can really save a lot of lives and a lot of damages. It's an obvious fact that California has more than 99% chance of another major earthquake happening in the next 30 years by USGS. So we need to be aware of this. Now, back to Long Beach. Long Beach has been also subject to earthquake. We are not foreign to earthquakes. 1933 Long Beach earthquake, which caused a lot of school damages and caused a lot of issues, happened 85 years ago in March 10th. In other words, it can happen any time. One thing about earthquakes is it would not inform you. It would not give you a notice to get prepared. What we have is based on the background and the message and learning and teachings that we all take from each other and get ourselves ready for the next one. But one thing that happened as a result of Long Beach earthquake that I'm very proud of my predecessors in Long Beach is 2 major laws came about in California as a result of Long Beach earthquake. 2 businessmen from Long Beach, Mr. Field and Mr. Riley, they went up to Sacramento and they initiated 2 laws that now we live based on. The Field Act, for those of you who may not be familiar with this act, established the Department of State Architect, which we call it Division of State Architect today, and regulates all our school projects. If you're designing, constructing, repairing, doing anything to schools, the inception is right there because of what we learned from Long Beach earthquake after 1933. Riley Act, a second act that also came about because of the efforts by Mr. Riley, established building and safety departments in all the cities. For those of who are building officials at the cities, or for those of us who are contractors and we go pull permit, 1933, that did not exist. Some cities, some agencies, some counties, they had organizations, they were doing some work, but that was the inception, because people of Long Beach, people of the California, they learned about that experience and they put it to a right use. And those laws came about. Later on, in 1990s, Long Beach did a URM, unreinforced masonry building retrofitting, which that also was very successful in Long Beach, and basically a lot of unreinforced masonries got retrofitted. Now, 85 years after, what are we doing in Long Beach? Are we still trying to be resilient? Are we still trying to be as proactive? And I'm standing in front of you and say, yes, there is a lot of good energy in Long Beach today to make the city more resilient. Now, how to get that, how to accomplish that is, I have an example in front of you, the Civic Center of Long Beach. Some of you who are familiar with Long Beach, you know about the building that my current office is in there right now. But that City Hall is a non-ductile building. So city management, city leaders have decided to go rebuild that Civic Center. So right now we are going through a major Civic Center reconstruction. By July of 2019, I can tell you, when I go to the City Hall, the building that I'm going to work at and the city that provides services to the rest of the Long Beach residents, it is a new building, it is a ductile moment frame building, and it's going to be able to be sustainable and resilient through any future earthquakes. Long Beach, we are sitting right on several faults that goes right by the City Hall. So we have learned this. I'm glad this project that is constructed under P3 construction management, which that by itself is a completely new phenomena, has integrated public and private energy financing together to be able to build a new civic center that's not financed through raising taxes or through raising fees. Very clever. Hopefully in future we will discuss, there will be another forum to discuss that concept, but it's very resilient, very sustainable, very clever way to generate money to make things happen. Now, by having said that, and by realizing the statistics that are out there showing us how vulnerable we are, how susceptible we can be to damages, City of Long Beach needs to do something for our private property ownership as well. We took care of our government building, Civic Center, but City has in mind to come up with a program, a resiliency program, that takes care of doing this study and identifying the vulnerable buildings that we have in Long Beach. There are estimates out there that could be about 5,000 buildings in Long Beach that could be not serviceable after the earthquake, and they could cause a lot of cost, it could cause a lot of problems for the City of Long Beach, public, for economy, and so on and so forth, including housing. So what are these 5 types? For those of you who may not be in the field of structural engineering, these are the buildings that basically have been identified beyond unreinforced masonry buildings that could cause problem. Now, for a city like Long Beach, if we have made most of our URM complying unreinforced buildings, and they're not going to fall on people and not going to cause problems, these are the other categories that in future could cause problem. Soft story, weak first floor, we all know this is typical of San Francisco and what San Francisco and LA currently are mitigating, and some other cities. Unenforced concrete or masonry buildings with flexible diaphragms. These are tilt-up buildings and warehouses that have got a very light, soft roof diaphragms that the walls can spill away from the roof. That's basically what it is. The non-ductile concrete frame buildings with masonry infill and non-ductile concrete buildings are very much like what we experienced or we saw in Mexico earthquake. For those of you to relate to, if you notice, these are parking structures. These are buildings that are built based with masonry, and they're not ductile. And the word ductile means flexibility. When earthquake comes in, a tree is ductile, can move with the earthquake and goes back to where it was and no damages. But if the building cannot behave that way, the energy goes and causes failure someplace in that building. Last and final are steel moment frame buildings that are pre-Northridge earthquake. The way they were designed at the time, the joint of the beam and column is overly strong and doesn't transfer the forces in the right place, so the buildings could experience some damages and suffer some structural problems. Now we identify 5 types of buildings. How to go about that? What is the strategy that cities like Long Beach or other cities need to implement or needs to start thinking about to mitigate this 5 category of the buildings? There's obviously a need for conducting some kind of a survey throughout the city by either inspecting, walking the streets, or going to the records and archives, getting the information. Then certain buildings are excluded, like the non-government building, hospital, schools, projects that are under different jurisdictions, are not under my jurisdiction, are not under city jurisdiction. So we exclude those two. We also do not include single-family dwellings and certain small residential projects because we don't feel like they are as crucial to the sustainability of the city, and they won't cause as much harm, let's put it that way. So all this research are done, the buildings are categorized, identified. We like to see a geo-based layer, so in future that message is not written, it's some kind of a map system that people can see, can identify where these buildings are, and ultimately have some kind of recommendation on how to fix as a guide for these building owners. We identify the buildings, what is next? You have to have some kind of recommendation, some kind of direction for public and building owners. And last and final is some kind of cost estimate of what it takes to retrofit all this. So the legislators, the public officials, public leaders are going to be very interested to know all that. So that is Long Beach plan. Now that was the approach. The actual detail of the plan, when you get into it, it becomes more extensive. There is a need for detailed attention to all the steps. So these 14 steps are some of the details that a consultant company or the cities need to go through to be able to properly list the vulnerable buildings. I will go through these 14 steps, but not all cities have to go through these 14 steps. There could be different approaches to some of these elements that I have identified here, but this is how Long Beach sees it, basically. You need to have a kickoff meeting to start this. You need to have a lot of reach out with the public, also public officials, to make sure everybody is in line and understand the process quickly. A GIS or some kind of archiving all this information is important, so it's transparent, everybody can see. The research starts from the tax assessors' research reports and coming to study the records of the city to be able to see if some of these buildings have been retrofitted voluntarily or no. So in order to come up with a condensed list and not a major list, there's a lot of homework needs to be done to establish that list. Then we get to what I call step 8, the initial list of vulnerable buildings. From there on, a city consultant or somebody needs to actually walk the street and verify the paperwork, verify the research that's done in the office with actual field conditions. then you can further shortlist or identify buildings that they were not established as a part of the research study part. Walking the streets is the most expensive part, the most laborious part of this study that needs to be conducted. Then from there on, some buildings, they may actually require people to go inside and verify certain things because you can't detect it from outside. So there are certain permissions that you need to acquire from the owners, to receive the city council, to be able to go inside the buildings and come up with that condensed final list that covers the whole gamut. When the list is final, obviously, is the degree of the upgrades necessary for different building types needs to be determined, the estimate of cost, and then suggested methods to implement is also important. Cities and agencies will have their own choice of how and when and how extensive to mitigate, how soon they want to mitigate. It all has to do with the economy of the city at the time, the finances, and the public belief and political whim behind it. Now, program benefits for Long Beach, quickly. Why do we go through all this? The program identifies how vulnerable a city like Long Beach is. When you determine that element, then you would know what you need to appropriate. The civic leaders, the city council, in appropriation of budget in years to come. Not over 1 year, 2 years, it could be a really long period of time. They can attend this. They will be able to prioritize what is more important to address and what is not as important. We need to do a lot of outreach to make sure the public realizes this is for their benefit. It is not just because of the government trying to set up rules and regulation. This is something that, as my previous predecessors on the podium mentioned, there is 6 times to 7 times time cost saving involved if you retrofit before the major earthquake happens. After the fact, the cost, the human cost, the economical cost, the housing issues, the chaos that happens after the earthquake, people not knowing what to do, are huge issues and elements that sometimes we can't put a price at them. For those of you who have ever experienced a true earthquake, I remember many years ago overseas, my dad there was a major earthquake someplace, and my dad and a few other businessmen, they decided to buy shoes and take it to these villages that they were experiencing earthquake, because the stores were not available. You couldn't find shoes for the kids. So there will come times that if you're not prepared it doesn't matter what country in the world you are. We just had an experience with Mexico earthquake last year. It's next door to us, not far. We have the same kind of building, non-ductile moment frame buildings, that they experienced and we all saw on TVs last year. The goal is hopefully we don't have that kind of experience here. And the picture that I picked here is the future of Long Beach. Long Beach New Civic Center has the aspiration of an artist. This is where we want to get. To be resilient and as forefront and as strong economy to provide good life for our citizens, we need to be proactive. Thanks for listening to me.